where a group of soldiers begins to examine every corner of the place, searching for something, and when that's not enough, they use their scanners so as not to miss any detail. And out of nowhere, a swift silhouette runs past, right behind them. So they shout, "There he is," getting on guard and aiming at the creature, who turns out to be none other than a small human child. He is scared and covered in scars, and the boy flees. But they still manage to capture him, and some time passes before the boy again opens his eyes, now lying in a comfortable bed, in a room where the bright light of the sun overwhelms him. And for its part, we see that this is a protection zone for children. So, having lived his entire life under an abandoned building, the little one is unable to understand what is happening, like the flat ground, the clean clothes, and the delicious food that is delivered to him on time. Everything is too new for him, so he begins to spend his time sitting on the hill, and everything changes when other children approach and offer to play together, but he gets tense as a cat and scares them away until a butterfly lands on his hair and calms him down. From a distance, he is being watched by two women. The red-haired one asks if the boy knows how to speak, and the other says no, explaining that he was found by the rescue team recently. So she has a theory that he grew up with animals, and that's why he can't communicate yet. And at that, the redhead thinks he's literally Mowgli, which confuses the other one, since he is a character from a story from the era before the arrival. And returning to the little one, he runs inside the building along with the rest of the children. When he sees that one of them receives a letter, of course, he doesn't understand what it is, to which the freckled girl explains that it was sent to him by a sponsor, who even send gifts sometimes, and as always, the boy says nothing. However, she takes him with her, pointing out that sponsors are adults who take care of them. Mostly good people, although there are bad ones too, and little by little she tells him about the other children's sponsors who have come to give them toys, clothes, and even talk to them, which sound like a dream. Except that the girl insists she doesn't need any sponsor because her mother promised to come get her after 100 nights, and while the boy watches her confused, she insists that 100 nights will pass in the blink of an eye, so she hopes it comes soon. So when he looks at the sky and blinks, he can even feel as if the stars were passing by quickly, and the next day, the teacher explains that the aliens came to Earth from the far reaches of space to become friends with humans. However, during recess, a boy with glasses insists that's a lie and pulls out a book he stole directly from the office of the principal, and so he begins to read, explaining that a long time ago, the aliens came to Earth, causing the world to fall into chaos, and humanity decided to fight with everything it had, including nuclear weapons, but unfortunately, that wasn't enough. And according to the book, the alien leader devoured the nuclear bomb as if it were a piece of candy. So humans had no choice but to surrender. And days later, the teachers start taking attendance and refer to the boy as Mori, handing him a letter that came directly for him and pointing out that it seems he now has a sponsor. The problem is that this is overheard by the freckled girl, who is so surprised that she drops her things on the floor and starts to cry, completely devastated. And even though they've only known each other for a short time, these two have become best friends. So Mori looks for her until he finds her crying under a table, and since she insists that he leave, he becomes desperate, not knowing what to do, and after a while, he even brings her a half-eaten cookie, a couple of leaves, and a twig that turn out to be his most prized possessions in life. So the freckled girl understands that he's trying to cheer her up, and confesses that more than 100 nights have already passed, and her mom hasn't come. So she probably told her that number because she thought she couldn't count that high. In other words, she's never coming and she's all alone from now on. But the funny thing is that, without saying much, Mori just sits with his back against hers, letting her know he won't abandon her. And as a joke, the freckled girl asks if it's okay for her to eat his little cookie, and the little one's expression says more than enough. So they spend the whole afternoon having fun, until she offers to read him the letter which, surprisingly, says nothing more than hello. Of course, the freckled girl thinks it makes no sense and turns the envelope over, revealing that it also contains a blue flower that immediately catches the protagonist's attention to the point that he spends the whole night sniffing it and marveling at a scent he had never experienced before. The interesting thing is that as the days go by, Mori starts receiving a bunch of incredible gifts that leave the children amazed and spark the freckled girl's curiosity, as they come with letters with simple and nonsensical phrases like nice circle. Of course, everyone wonders who his sponsor is, theorizing that it's a very rich person, and one of them mentions that people tend to be extra kind when they feel sorry for them. In any case, Mori is only interested in the crayons and tries to eat them until they explain to him that they're for drawing, and the poor thing's mind is almost blown. And after that, the director asks all the children to help them with all the dirty laundry, and they happily agree, treating it like some kind of game. The only one who isn't so convinced is the freckled girl, but even Mori finds it fun once foam starts coming out of the water. So he goes crazy and the girl asks him to be careful, until she spots a figure approaching in the distance and screams, "Rowena," causing the little girl's eyes to sparkle with joy as she runs into the arms of her mother. The reunion is so emotional that Mori is left speechless. And later that same day, Rowena has her bags packed, so she goes to say her goodbyes, telling him to take care of himself, to chew his food well, and she gives him a bag and a pair of boots, so he'll never have to walk barefoot again. Mori can't quite process the situation, but it's obvious she's going to miss him. So she hugs him emotionally while telling him that she hopes he gets everything he wants. The next day, Rowena leaves with her mother, and everyone says goodbye to her cheerfully, except for Mori, who feels very strange. And without realizing it, he returns to the same hills from before. His friend's absence is impossible to forget, but he doesn't feel particularly lonely, clinging to the gifts from his mysterious sponsor. The cape is warm as the sunrise, the fun toys, and even though he can't read, the letters have that lovely floral scent that he loves. Slowly, Mori starts to remember his friend's words and Rowena's reunion with her mother, wondering if his sponsor could be his own mother. And so he begins to think, and that very same night he packs all the things Rowena gave him and says goodbye to the orphanage. From a distance, starting to walk away, forging his own path toward the unknown, setting off on a journey to find his mother. After walking for a long time, Mori wakes up in what looks like a barn, but is actually a train that he snuck onto to help him get as far away as possible from the orphanage and closer to his goal. Upon reaching a vast desert, he decides to get off, kindly says goodbye to the train, and begins to walk until a strange noise catches his attention, and when he turns around, he notices it's a group of bandits approaching him at full speed. He runs as fast as he can, but he's so slow that they end up easily surrounding him. The scene is being watched from a distance by a mysterious, red-skinned individual, and the surprise comes when the bandits get off their motorcycles and realize that Mori is a human, and although seeing him so spiky, one of them asks the others if they're sure about this, and most importantly, if he might be worth some money. And in the end, one of them nervously suggests that they could eat him, insisting that he's so small no one would notice he was gone. But before they can do anything, they are stopped by an alien twice their size. It was their boss, who asks what the hell they are doing, and the bandit apologizes. However, the boss acknowledges that Mori could be a good appetizer, and it seems like he was going to consider eating him, when out of nowhere one of the bandits' heads explodes, and they begin to be attacked by the red-skinned guy from before. And upon seeing him, the bandits recognize him as Ryder and shoot with everything they've got, only to be surprised that he is able to dodge every shot with absurd skill, and seeing that it's a direct confrontation and is inevitable, the boss prepares to fight, and although Ryder lunges at him, causing a huge collision, he manages to come out unscathed, thanks to being able to raise a protective barrier just in time. The problem is that won't be enough. Since Ryder also comes out unscathed, and before they can do anything, he fires a powerful laser beam with which he finishes off every single one of the bandits in a second, and once everything calms down, Ryder mentions that they shouldn't have come to cause trouble in his territory, and then turns his gaze to the protagonist, who gets on guard as the alien asks him what the hell he is supposed to be, and, adorably, Mori starts to growl as if he were a cat, so Ryder analyzes his emotions with a device, determining that he is scared, and this same device reveals that he is a small human child, and with that, in fact, Ryder makes himself look as kind and smiley as possible to calm him down, explaining that he is safe and that this little thing next to him is his friend, Ayla. Best of all, assuming he's lost, Ryder offers to take him home, which makes the little one's eyes sparkle, and he confidently agrees to follow him. Unfortunately, Ryder's attitude is nothing more than an act, as he starts thinking that although leaving humans alone has been an unspoken rule for a long time, eating them isn't technically illegal. So, even though he's very small, someone would surely be willing to pay a lot of money for him to devour as a snack or use as a toy. And the interesting part comes when Ryder notices his clothes and, out of curiosity, lifts his cape, noticing something that sends shivers down his spine, and decides the best thing to do is just leave him here, insisting he's a very busy person, so Ryder just gets on his bike and says goodbye, speeding off while thinking he almost got himself into big trouble. Since that's no ordinary cape, but one that bears a very important distinctive mark, and to her. He calls her a chicken and, besides telling her to shut up, Ryder mentions that he's very thirsty, which causes a small hand to pass him a bottle of water. The alien even thanks it, until he realizes he should be alone on the bike and, upon turning around, notices it's the protagonist, who somehow managed to climb on and cling to him with all his might, of course. Ryder tries to shake him off, but that only causes him to trip on a rock, and they end up having an accident, to the point where he loses consciousness and doesn't wake up until well into the night, covered with all the protagonist's cards, toys, and belongings. And Ryder doesn't understand what's happening, at which point Mori peeks out and nearly scares him to death, while she explains that the little one put all those things on top of him to keep him warm in case his body temperature dropped too low. And the device also warns that he is suffering from severe dehydration, which is enough to make the protagonist run off at full speed to find a bottle of water, with the misfortune of tripping over the same rock as before, and ends up spilling it all over him, and in a super adorable way. Mori starts rummaging through his things for something to dry him with, but at that moment, Ryder gets a chance to see the seal on his cards, where the same symbol he saw before stands out. The logo of the FA clan, whose leader is one of the 7 fingers of the being within whom contains the entire universe, and that emblem can only be used by him and those to whom he has given express authorization. In fact, it's said that if anyone tries to threaten those people, it's the same as signing their own death warrant. So doing anything to the dwarf means danger. However, Ryder starts to formulate another type of plan in his mind and observes the clues he has: a human with no skills and in a state of need, items marked with that symbol, and letters full of words of affection whose paper is of such high quality that it could cover a whole month's worth of food. He wonders if he could receive a large reward for returning the little one. And so the next day, he starts his journey on foot while explaining to the protagonist that no one knows this world like he does, and that he is a great person. So, he is willing to do him this favor as long as he remembers who helped him in these difficult times. The problem is that Mori blatantly ignores him, and when Ryder approaches to ask him to pay attention, his soul almost leaves his body when he sees that he is eating a beetle and snatches it from his mouth like a mother to her child, giving him a huge lecture on why he shouldn't eat those kinds of things. In fact, he explains that all the shiny blue or purple creatures can be extremely toxic, so he should stay away. And above all, not eat anything that looks even slightly suspicious. And, at that moment, Ryder thinks that with that warning it will be more than enough. But the next day, as he continues on his way, Mori keeps finding new and very creative ways to keep putting himself in danger. The protagonist even falls into quicksand, all with that ridiculously adorable face he has. Of course, he gets more and more annoyed when Ryder scolds him for being a walking death trap, and at night the alien wonders what the hell he is doing with his life, but then he notices that Mori is focused on his own thing. So he asks him what he's drawing, causing him to get excited and try to explain what it's about, without much success. However, the alien manages to read his name engraved among the things, so he starts calling him Mori, and when he asks him what that weird black thing in his drawings is, it turns out the little one had drawn him at first. Ryder is alarmed by how ugly it is, but then he stares at the paper for a long time, since this is the first time in his life that someone has taken the trouble to draw him, and just then, the AI identifies that he is happy. However, like the tough guy he is, he tells it that it doesn't know what it's talking about, and the two of them start helping Mori to improve his drawings, and the next day, they arrive at a large hill where he notices they only have to continue for a little longer to reach their destination, but the little one was already running in the opposite direction, encountering a kind of lizard that was super adorable, and just then, the protagonist touches its hand, and they start to play. At which point the creature's mother sees him as a threat and attacks him, causing his entire body to catch on fire at that very moment. And from one second to the next, Mori is completely consumed by the flames. Ryder panics, shooting at the creatures while running towards him with the intention of saving him. The problem is that when he extends his hand, the flames grow to such a point that it's completely impossible to get him out of there, and he has no choice but to watch the scene in desperation, knowing that only ashes will remain in the place where the boy once was. However, moments later, the red cape emerges from the flames, and in front of everyone, it begins to put out the fire little by little, bringing Mori back, as if it were some kind of magic, and so the strong blaze from before disappears, leaving only the adorable little one sitting calmly on the ground, while Ryder, the mother, and the baby lizard are left speechless, applauding at such a spectacle. And desperate, the alien asks him if he's okay, and Mori nods, while the alien admits that he almost had a heart attack and doesn't hesitate to unleash his rage on the creatures, aiming his weapon at them, ready to eliminate them. And the AI asks him to calm down, and the mother lizard tries to explain, but of course, they don't speak the same language, and despite not understanding each other, Ryder tells it to stop playing the victim, since he also has a little one to protect, and she almost barbecued him. And so the argument continues until she warns them that something is approaching from beneath the surface. But by the time they pay attention, it's already too late, as they are overwhelmed by a version even bigger than the lizard. Apparently this is the true leader of the pack. So all his thoughts turn to protecting Morris, and he prepares to fight. However, the giant creature doesn't attack them, but instead scolds its children for being so rude and forces them to apologize. And scared to death but trying to act tough, Ryder tells them he will leave them alone this time, so they say their goodbyes. But before leaving, the baby lizard approaches the protagonist and gives him a precious stone to add to his treasures. In response, Morris gives it a feather, and they play a little longer before saying goodbye, and there, Ryder sees he's a bit nervous, so he lets him know that he's only still alive, thanks to that cape, which probably possesses an ultra-powerful magic, capable of protecting him from all harm and even regulating his body temperature. In short, whoever gave it to him loves him very much, and he should thank them, which excites Morris so much that he starts running in circles around him. And later that night, Ryder can't stop thinking about how cute he is, so he asks her to tell him everything she knows about humans, discovering that, unlike aliens, they reproduce in a way that Morris must have something they call a mother. And then we are told that a long, long time ago, the master of the Earth abandoned the planet to visit space, and when he returned, he discovered that many new life forms had been created, including humans, more violent and ambitious than the rest. And little by little he discovered that humans operated based on the belief that everything belonged to them, from the grass under their feet to even other humans as well, but their populations soon began to dwindle and disappear, and Ryder thinks, seeing how things are today, humans don't have to worry much about the little ones of their race. And almost instinctively, he turns to Morris and takes his hand, looking at him with an affection that surprises even himself. And on the other hand, in an unknown location, one creature assures another. And there are biosensors scattered throughout the forest surrounding the protection center, and that perhaps they were ineffective because of the powers placed on the cloak. But they have nothing to worry about, as they are determined to find the little one, no matter what. After that, we see Morris lying on that wide hill until he gets up, confused and a little scared, seeing that he is all alone. Still, the beauty of the landscape dazzles him. However, at that very moment, he opens his eyes, realizing it was all a dream. And Ryder tells him he woke up just in time, as they have finally arrived in town. And so, they begin to make their way through the streets, which are bustling, full of life, and represent a new world that Morris has never seen before. And just then, someone screams, startling the three of them, but it turns out to be a crowd of women. Aliens, all trying to get closer, marveling at how cute and adorable the little one is. It's terrible, the way they're throwing themselves at us, swarming us. Of course, Morris gets nervous and Ryder, automatically, goes on guard, warning them that he is very, very expensive merchandise, and that none of them would be able to afford him, and his words greatly confuse the protagonist. But they press on until they reach a tavern, where they meet a guy with blonde hair and horns named Valentine. And it seems he's the one who runs the place and makes a couple of jokes about how only idiots eat humans these days, until Ryder shows him the seal from the letters and asks him how to find those people. Instantly, Valentine is astonished and begins to whisper, insisting that he had only ever seen that emblem once in his life, but that he could probably locate a representative in the city, and that's where things get complicated since Ryder gets scared and mentions that's where the referee lives. However, Valentine has nothing more to say and starts to appreciate the protagonist's unique features until Ryder asks him for some provisions. And they negotiate the price while Morris plays around, and once the final price is set, poor Ryder has to rummage through her things to figure out how to pay, and she proposes that they sell one of the protagonist's possessions, to which the alien assures her that they could kill him for that, and that's when she notices the stone. Precious stone from the lizard, and asks Valentine how much it's worth, to which he explains that it's a Tomos gem and throws it on the counter, causing it to break into a bunch of pieces. Of course, the protagonist almost has a heart attack seeing his treasure being ruined, but Valentine asks him to calm down and just watch, because in a couple of seconds the gem becomes like new again, having the ability to reassemble itself. The problem is that, even so, it's worthless, so before continuing with the negotiation, Ryder passes it to Morris without noticing that it started to roll across the entire tavern, and the little one wandered off chasing it innocently, but when he manages to catch it, he runs into a terrifying-looking creature that, upon seeing him, tells him he's adorable. Scared to death, the protagonist starts running back to Ryder. The problem is that the creature grabs him by the cape and pulls him towards it, putting him inside its bag, which works like a kind of black hole. So Morris falls into a deep darkness where, no matter how much he screams or cries, no one is able to hear him. Meanwhile, out of nowhere, Ryder gets a very bad feeling and turns around, realizing the little one is nowhere to be found. The worst part is that the rest of the tavern is completely calm, as if nothing had happened, and when she starts shouting Morris's name, no one reacts, except for someone who complains upon feeling the guy who kidnapped the little one bumping into him to leave the place. And in these last moments, Ryder makes eye contact with the subject, feeling a very bad premonition, so she runs out after him, asking him to stop, but he not only ignores her, but also starts to slip away through the crowd of people. And when Ryder finally gets close enough to almost grab him by the cape, the subject jumps off a cliff, and she detects a small human trapped in his pocket. So it becomes clear to them that he's trying to kidnap Morris, and with that in mind, the two of them split up to try and intercept him, but the guy is incredibly elusive and the town's layout doesn't help, so she decides to use her technology similar to the one we saw at the beginning to scan all the streets, track his movements in real time, and calculate a total of 14 possible routes to catch him, and little by little, the options are narrowed down as she guides Ryder through the most suitable route to intercept him, and a brutal chase begins, in which he even ends up destroying a work of art made of pure sand by a young artist that took her 6 whole months to complete. And in the end, Ryder isn't willing to lose Morris without a fight, and the kidnapper starts to feel more and more pressured, so much so that the protagonist inside him begins to shake as if he were inside a washing machine, and after a while, she leads him to a very specific point, clarifying that he will run into the target in a few seconds, but he tells her it has to be some kind of joke, because getting to the guy means jumping an almost fatal distance. So, when she shouts, "Now," Ryder doesn't hesitate for a second and jumps, surprising the kidnapper, to the point that he freezes, thinking he's a madman and that he'll die in the process. The surprise is that, just as he's about to hit the ground, he is met by his motorcycle, which was being controlled by her, managing not only to save himself, but also to end up face to face with him, and, brazenly, the kidnapper asks who he is and why he's after him, to which Ryder just calls out to the protagonist and asks him to make any movement. "I can't hear him," and right then the protagonist starts shouting at him, and scans the voice, confirming it's Mori. So Ryder demands that he return his human, since he already knows he has him tucked away
in his pocket right now.
Still, the guy plays dumb, and has the nerve to say that he's his human now, which causes the protagonist's levels to start to rise along with Ryder's desperation.
And, in the end, he
pulls out his weapon and threatens to kill him if he doesn't return the little one. But the kidnapper refuses, insisting that he finds him adorable, so now he's his. And the worst part is that the kidnapper recognizes Ryder, insisting that his reputation precedes him, since he is an illegally created, ignorant creature, simple-minded, and an outcast. So he asks how someone so dangerous as him could possibly raise a human being, and insists that he can love him much better than he ever could. Not only that, but he also insists that Ryder only wants him on a whim, meaning they are not the same. Fortunately, Ryder doesn't fall for his provocations and suggests that Morris be the one to decide who he stays with. However, the kidnapper says that won't be necessary, since if he fires that weapon within the town limits, all the alarms will go off, and he'll instantly be hunted down as a criminal. Of course, this fact makes him feel confident.
But
Ryder gets serious and points out that he doesn't care. Meanwhile, Morris spends the whole time screaming and crying for help on the inside, experiencing levels of fear he had never felt in his short life, despairing at the thought that there's no way
to escape. But then,
everything changes when he hears a familiar voice coming from his stuffed toy, the one his mother had given him, which tells him not to forget to go to the bathroom before bed. And while it doesn't seem like a big revelation, something clicks inside Morris. And back with the kidnapper, he tries to offer Ryder a deal, suggesting one of them will take the head and the other will take the body. An idea that Ryder, of course, ignores, thinking he has enough energy left on his weapon to blow his head off. However, he doesn't have the courage to do it, since he doesn't know if Morris could be hurt in the process, and in the end, he knows the best thing is to find a way to get him out of there first, and the kidnapper complains that he is being ignored until he notices a kind of strange liquid slowly coming out from inside him, and the shock is so great that he almost falls backward and opens his pocket, revealing Morris without pants, completely focused on peeing himself. Of course, an opportunity that the little one doesn't waste to escape, and the kidnapper starts insulting him, threatening to take his life until Ryder makes the first move, blowing one of his arms off instantly. And desperate, the kidnapper tries to get it back, but just then, Ryder puts her gun right to his head and tells him to listen carefully, because if he ever touches that child again with his filthy hands, he will lose much more than just one limb. And at that moment, the town's alarms go off and she knows it's time to leave. Getting on the motorcycle, she activates a camouflage that turns them invisible, adjusts the protagonist, and they take off. Confused at first, but then dying of laughter at how things had turned out. And she insists that it was a very creative idea. And Ryder congratulates him for doing a good job, and when Morris squeezes his stuffed toy, it says to him, "I'm very proud of you," causing his cheeks to blush, and feel happy about what he has accomplished. And just then the protagonist climbs onto Ryder and asks her to get him out of there as quickly as possible, heading for the cradle of the whales. And after that, they arrive in a more mountainous area, and it looks like the protagonist's Hill of Dreams, but it's no longer so lonely. And now it stands with a beautiful view and the best company. And from then on, they begin to travel through new and impressive parts of the world. From forests that feel magical, to abandoned ruins, to swamps straight out of a horror movie. And on one occasion, they enter a cave and Ryder turns on a flashlight, causing the protagonist. He got so relaxed that he ended up scratching him, and right then the machine doesn't hesitate to note that the little one seems to be afraid of concentrated light sources. And there are days when they spend hours lying on the beach, and others where they are attacked by mutant bats. And mornings when poor Ryder falls asleep and ends up with his whole face painted. And the most impressive thing happens in the middle of the night while they drive across a wide plain, and amidst the northern lights they find an entire pod of whales flying through the air. In fact, the emotion on the little one's face is so great that she doesn't hesitate to activate the autopilot mode while Ryder takes Morris in his arms and lifts him up, creating a magical moment, which turns into a complete miracle when the protagonist manages to touch the tip of a fin, and his eyes shine as if he were reaching the very heavens. And that night Maury dreams of his mother, who cradles him in her arms, whispering over and over again, "Pretty circle." And the next day, he wakes up snuggled in Ryder's lap, who complains to her about the turbulence, to which she tells him that he can drive if he wants, and they start to argue until they reach an imposing mountain range, at which point he clarifies that it would be best to walk from that point on to avoid taking risks and attracting the attention of the wrong beings. However, he tells Morris that he is about to discover something incredible about the human body and bundles him up so much that he looks like a ball, and she doubts the poor thing can even walk. However, the real problem begins when he stops, staring at the horizon for a moment, and detects something moving towards them. At a speed of 491 kilometers per hour, Ryder knows that something so fast can't be anything good, and although he had his doubts at first, it isn't long before he feels a chill that paralyzes him on the spot, followed by a very bad feeling. So he decides to get back on the bike right away. Unfortunately, she announces that they have 2 minutes and 40 seconds left before contact, a number that slowly counts down until the being appears in their field of vision, and she only has time to scream, "Here it comes." And without hesitation, Ryder slides his bike and shoots, but the problem is he can't do absolutely anything to it, as his attack was stopped and consumed by a kind of black hole that the being is able to control at will, and, perplexed, Ryder can't even find the strength to try to escape, as it's useless. Since before him appears the most imposing enemy he has ever seen in his life. One that has come specifically for them, and, well, we see that it is the same creature from before, who made sure it could find Morris, of course. Ryder doesn't know this, and thinks it's a bounty hunter who is sent after him for shooting inside the town zone, leaving him paralyzed, as he definitely didn't think it would be someone so strong. Meanwhile, the enemy observes them, and upon noticing Morris, it's as if something clicks inside it, finding itself face to face with its target. Most unfortunately, she warns Ryder that he only has a 10% chance of winning against someone so strong, and, although the boy asks her if she's sure, he himself acknowledges that she is never wrong and that his opponent is 1,000 times stronger than him. So, to protect Morris, he must avoid fighting one-on-one at all costs, and, with that in mind, the first thing he does is shoot, because although it seems contradictory, this allows him to create a smokescreen to flee at full speed, activating the overdrive mode of his bike and thus increasing the distance between them. But the plan doesn't end there, because, making sure he's at a relatively safe distance, Ryder shoots again, aiming not at the enemy, but at the mountain behind it to cause an avalanche, of course. He knows that won't be enough to stop it, but it will buy him some time. So they get moving once again, squeezing every bit of speed out of the bike to reach the bridge that leads directly to the city. Meanwhile, poor Morris doesn't know whether to be thrilled or scared, and the ride is so extreme that Ryder tells her to hold on tight. But the good thing is that it works, as they can see in the distance how they are getting closer and closer to the famous bridge. But unfortunately, the happiness doesn't last long, because behind them they can see the enemy calmly approaching, so Ryder doesn't hesitate to shoot at him, even though it's useless, as his opponent stops the projectile with absurd ease and just keeps running after them. And at that moment, Ryder notices that he doesn't seem to intend to attack. But that doesn't lessen his anxiety, and he thinks everything will be fine once he reaches
The bridge.
the problem is that when he looks back again, the enemy has already caught up and grabs him by the neck with ease, stopping the bike in its tracks and preparing a black hole with which he will surely be able to annihilate him on the spot. Of course, Ryder tries to take advantage of the close range to shoot, but it's useless, and as the seconds pass, it becomes obvious that this will be their end. However, something changes as the enemy turns his gaze toward Morris, realizing that he isn't saving him from some trafficker, but that the little one is clinging to Ryder with all his might and looking at him with the desperate eyes of someone watching a loved one die, and the surprise is so great that the enemy loosens his grip, an opportunity Ryder uses to jump off the bike. And since they were already on the bridge at that point, he lets himself fall towards the abyss, and it's obvious the enemy wasn't familiar with this place, at least not as much as he was. And he watches them for a few seconds, as if to see what they'll do, only to be astonished when a whale suddenly emerges from under the bridge towards him, and Ryder doesn't hesitate for a second to grab onto it. Meanwhile, Ayala, who is controlling the bike, just deactivates it and rejoins them, while the enemy watches Morris get further and further away, as if wondering what to do next. After a while, the scene fades to complete darkness, where someone can be heard speaking faintly in the distance, and slowly, the person Ryder opens his eyes. The one who fainted after a while, with the whales. The most adorable thing is that the first thing he does upon regaining consciousness is ask for Morris, and Aya congratulates him on his strategy, since the whales appeared precisely because of the avalanche he caused. In other words, he had it all coldly calculated, and, still confused, Ryder asks where they are, and begins to look around, feeling a strong sense of relief when he notices a gigantic dome in the middle of the mountains, as they have officially arrived at the city, and he gently places Mori on the ground, who super adorably says goodbye to the whales for helping them. And although Ryder planned to just go in, Aya suggests they disguise themselves, as they don't know if word has reached them about the bounty on his head. The surprising thing is that he himself can make his appearance distort in less than a second. And even though the change isn't that extreme, it is enough for the little one not to recognize him, and he starts to look from side to side, searching for the real Ryder. Of course, Ryder takes him in his arms and tries to clarify that it's him, but Io insists that the poor thing doesn't recognize him, and proposes another disguise alternative, with the three of them standing one on top of the other to look like a kind of four-armed giant. They look very ridiculous, but they present themselves in that same way. At the city entrance, where a robot welcomes them. And there they insist they have come to request an audience with the FA clan. And in response, the robot asks them to present the symbol. And so he tasks Morris with rummaging through his treasures for one of the wallets. And once it is verified, the robot displays a giant and super complex chart, asking them to identify the individual they wish to see. Of course, that's where the first problem comes in, since they have no idea who it is, and the symbol can be used by both the leaders as well as by any subordinate, so Ryder and Aya. They panic, thinking that choosing the wrong one could be a death sentence. However, Morris looks closely at the chart, and a particular sphere catches his attention, so to be sure, he just takes out one of the blue flowers that his godfather had sent him. The curious thing is that the robot recognizes it on the spot, stating that it knows exactly who he is, and one of the men on the chart comes to life, turning into a kind of portal they had never seen before, and the robot notices their amazement. So it assures them that they will reach their destination, no matter which direction they go. And so the boys slowly venture into the darkness until the void turns into a beautiful, sunny field. Not only that, but with just a couple of steps, they arrive at an impressive mansion, and while Ryder and Aya are surprised that all of this is inside the city, Morris can't help but notice the house's resemblance to the orphanage. In fact, he gets so excited that he starts running towards the mansion, and the others follow him until they reach a gigantic fence, and Ryder tells them to be very careful, since visiting someone uninvited is punishable by death. For that very reason, they start looking for a doorbell, but just then Morris hears voices coming from one of the house's windows, as well as long black hair that could belong to his mother, and he gets so excited that he doesn't hesitate to cross the fence, run across the garden, and sneak in through one of the windows, while Ryder starts to panic, pressing the button like crazy for someone to open up so they don't end up in jail. But let's just say it's already too late, because little Morris begins to explore the inside, running around, full of hope and searching for answers. And just then, he notices the black hair he saw from outside and enters the room, completely thrilled, only to find a creature whose appearance resembles that of a black bird as well as another white one. And both are astonished to see Morris, questioning who he is and how he got inside. And as the little one panics, they wonder to each other if they were expecting guests that day, and everything changes when Morris perceives that particular floral scent that has become practically a refuge for him, and even more excited, he starts to follow the scent to a room down the hall. Of course, the creatures try to stop him, but he is faster and runs with only one goal in mind, that large door where he will definitely find his mother. And just then he bumps into a figure right where the particular scent is coming from. But the problem is that when he looks up, he is met with 12 eyes staring intently at him, coming from the creature that looks like anything but human. And Morris is paralyzed with fear and cannot help but remember how magical Rowena's reunion with her mother felt. So the disappointment is evident on his face as his mind is flooded with what he thought that moment would be. At the same time, the creature senses his fear and tries to comfort him by stroking his head. But before it can even place its hand on him, the little one begins to cry inconsolably, and at that moment, Ryder finally manages to get into the house and reaches the room scared. But it is already too late, because Morris's crying startles the very creature and echoes in every corner of the mansion. And after a while, we see the poor boy who is still crying huddled under a bed, while Kai and Ryder do everything they can to make him understand that he is safe. In the process, they are being watched by the little birds from before, who turn out to be the servants of that place. But even though Ryder tries to calm the little one in every way possible, it is useless. Upon leaving the room, he encounters the creature from before, whose voice reveals pure worry, to which Ryder assures her that they will need to give him some time alone, as he has never seen him cry like that. The creature laments not being what the little one expected, and introduces herself as Miria, the benefactor of Morris and the leader of the FA clan. And after that, several hours pass until night falls, and with his eyes completely swollen, Morris decides to come out from under the bed, finding that both Ryder and Kai are sleeping peacefully. The little one tries to wake him up gently, which implies punching Ryder in the face with all he's got, but the latter just keeps sleeping and starving. Morris has no choice but to start exploring the mansion on his own in search of some food. Luckily, his sense of smell is amazing, and he makes his way through the hallways until he reaches the kitchen, being watched by Miria, who does everything she can to keep her distance. And in the end, Morris finds a bowl full of fruit and remembers that Ryder had tried to offer him some earlier, so he tries to take some, although the problem is that he's too short to be able to reach them, and, with great effort, he starts climbing the counter until he manages to grab one in his hands, but at that moment he hears a noise behind him and, upon turning around, he meets Miria's shy gaze watching him from a distance. And going back a couple of minutes into the past, we see her leave a book she had been reading in the library with a melancholic and quite sad look when the sound of small footsteps going through the hallways caught her attention. That was the exact moment she saw little Morris, crazily chasing the smell of food, and, although with some hesitation, she also decided to follow him to see what he was up to, and that's how she saw him struggle to grab a piece of fruit, and we return to the present right at the moment. Their gazes meet, with Morris freezing in place, just like the first time they met. The thing is that Miria looks much more sinister at night, to the point that the little one's hair stands on end like a cat's, and he starts running all over the room, causing the poor girl to nearly have a heart attack and decide to run away so as not to make things worse. However, once Morris manages to calm down, we see a piece of fruit roll shyly towards him as an offering and, despite still being very nervous, his hunger gets the better of him and he runs after it. Of course, the fruit was given to him by Miria, who stays on the other side of the door, afraid of making things worse and, remembering how hard he had tried to reach the bowl, she tosses him the fruits one by one so he can satisfy his hunger. And all of this happens slowly, as if she were feeding some kind of wild animal. So when Miria hears the little one eating bit by bit, her eyes sparkle with an indescribable mix of relief and adoration, and under the starlight, Mori has a feast and, after a while, Miria gathers the courage to peek, but she just stays there watching him eat in peace, enjoying the moment. And the next day, Morris wakes up lying on the kitchen floor, to the voices of the workers who are starting to arrive and are murmuring excitedly about how much they want to see the famous human child in person. Of course, Morris gets on guard and runs off until he bumps into Ryder, who asks him how he slept, only to be surprised when the little one sticks to him like glue, hugging him so affectionately that he's left completely paralyzed, not knowing what to do. She makes fun of them, but the interesting part comes when he tells Morris what happened the night before while he was crying under the bed. It turns out that Ryder had a meeting with Miria, where she told him how worried she was about Morris, since when he escaped, they thought he had gone after his friend. However, they didn't find any clues and, definitely, she never imagined he would manage to get there. And she asked him how she could thank him, and although Ryder insisted it was nothing, she handed him a mysterious box, asking him to open it and leaving him amazed by its contents. And inside the box was none other than a star fragment worth at least 60,000 coins, a fortune, with which he would hardly have to work again in his life, and Ryder's eyes shone like never before. But the problem began when Miria thanked him for his work, for having escorted Morris here, basically implying that his role in the little one's life was over, and even though that was his goal when he met him, the smile on Ryder's face disappeared completely, nostalgically remembering all the moments they lived through together, including that night when he saw him sleeping so peacefully, and without realizing it, the little one ended up building a permanent place in his heart. And his reaction went unnoticed by her, and before thinking twice, Ryder murmured that he wasn't ready yet, and, despite the fear of contradicting one of the most powerful beings in the universe, he insisted that Morris would take some time to adapt to that place. So the little one isn't ready to leave him. However, he played hard to get by pointing out that he is a very busy person but that he can make some room in his schedule to stay here for a while, until Morris feels, yes, 100% comfortable with such a change. Miria asks if it would be too much trouble for him, to which Ryder insisted that the little one had grown fond of him. The chat continued normally until he felt someone approaching from behind, and it was none other than the overpowered enemy from last time. Naturally, Ryder screamed his head off, to which Miria clarified that it was just Jair, one of her assistants, but she also apologized, aware of the confrontation they had, explaining that he was attacked that way because they thought he was scum who had kidnapped Myra on purpose to collect a reward. And with that, we actually return to the present, where she tells the little one absolutely everything, but he doesn't hear a thing because Ryder is covering his ears, so as not to worry him with the details. He does, however, let him know they'll be staying for a while, sending him to explore the house with her, while he attends a meeting with Miria and all the members of her staff, and upon entering the room, she asks him to take a seat. starting the meeting, explaining that they still haven't been able to get in touch with Salam. Someone Ryder clearly doesn't know, so he asks about him and the workers. Imply that he is related to the Arbiter. Here we see that the Arbiter is none other than the owner of planet Earth, so he has the ability to dictate the laws of life on it, as his arms carry the weight of the entire world, while his 3 legs create the perfect balance and equilibrium to support it. And Miria explains that she has the power to manipulate black holes because she is one of the 7 fingers of the Arbiter, just like Salam, who also rules the land from this mountain range to the Reden River, a territory where the shelter Morris is in is located, and that's important. Because when the little one disappeared, the people from the orphanage didn't seem to have any contact with Salam, nor had they received any reports detailing his condition. And then, one of his employees insists that Salam is a very busy man, so they could surely contact him soon. But the fact is that whatever happens with Morris, also, must be consulted with him. And Miriam tells Ryder that he'll have to stay until everything is resolved, but the atmosphere changes when the worker next to him looks at him with a super heavy vibe and asks if they can start the real meeting. After that, Ryder goes out, and another one of the workers hands him a ridiculously small set of utensils, which he observes without understanding what it's about until they explain that it's the special dinnerware for Morris, which he spent all night making. And Ryder tells him that he's not a dwarf either, to which another one of the workers takes him to see the bed, and, in this case, it's ridiculously huge, so that Morris can be safe even if he moves 40 meters. During the night, it's obvious that everyone is very excited about the little one. Meanwhile, Morris is with Paws, exploring the house, with curiosity, scratching the walls, playing in the kitchen, and going through every corner, while she explains what everything is. The interesting part comes when they enter an office with a large table full of papers, which makes him realize that someone has been working hard here. And with great curiosity, Morris starts to look through the things, coming across the pattern of something he recognizes very well. It was his cape, so he explains to her that this office must belong to the lady who designed not only his cape, but also all the treasures that Miria sent him, which is evident from the prototypes and wrappers scattered all over the place. And that changes things for Morris, who can now only imagine Miria working hard in this office and is left amazed, until they are found by one of the houseworkers, who is relieved to see him safe and sound, insisting on how much she worried when she found out he was lost. The good thing is that, unlike the last few times, Morris doesn't run away but instead gets a little shy while the worker explains to him that Miria is doing her best to understand him, and with that in mind, the little one slowly peeks into the room where she was having the meeting, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and amazement. However, when she turns around, he just gets scared and runs off as usual. Of course, that makes her very sad. And Ryder observes the situation, declaring that it's time to improve things between the two of them, and although there's nothing Miria wants more than that, she thinks it's useless, so Ryder decides to create a plan with several steps so she can become friends with Morris. The first tactic is to sweeten him up with some treats, so Miria approaches him timidly with a tray of freshly baked cookies, but it's no use since his workers already had him surrounded, offering him all sorts of delicious things. The second tactic is to approach him surrounded by his favorite things, so Ryder covers Miria with everything the little guy enjoys, as if she were some kind of Christmas tree. The problem is that when she appears before Morris, he not only gets scared but also panics when he sees that she has all his things. The third tactic is to present herself in a familiar environment, so Ryder insists that she get on his motorcycle, so the little one will feel at home, which also doesn't go very well, since she doesn't know how to drive, and ends up crashing. The fourth tactic is the most complex, as it involves Ryder pretending to be the bad guy, attacking Morris, and having Miria become his heroine by saving him. But unfortunately, when he shows up before the little one, he's unable to resist his charms, so when Miria arrives at the scene, supposedly to save him, the poor guy does nothing but pamper him with cuddles, and after that they try different strategies, but nothing works, and at night, Morris sleeps peacefully until he starts dreaming about the moment he was found by the soldiers, and ends up waking up quite distressed and with his breathing accelerated, and his face covered in sweat. Morris starts looking around as if searching for someone who can help him, but he is in a room, completely alone, and, as if that weren't enough, just then a bolt of lightning strikes, so he gets scared and runs out at full speed. running down the hallway in search of Raider. The problem is that he is completely immersed in the repairs for his motorcycle, so he doesn't even notice that the little one needs him. And amidst the thunder and the terrible darkness, Morris makes his way through the mansion, with a fear that only continues to grow. Luckily, at that moment he notices a light on and ends up entering the same office as before. Only now Miria is also there, who had fallen asleep, sitting by the fireplace. And little by little, Morris crawls towards the warmth, noticing that she had spent the whole night reading books about how to improve the relationship with children, and although of course the little one doesn't understand a single word of what they say, somehow he feels confident enough to approach her slowly. However, upon seeing her, he again feels the same fear as before, but that doesn't stop him from deciding to sit on her lap. At first he looks quite tense, however, still asleep, Miria hugs him, leaving him surprised on her chest, marveling at the sensation. And after that, he looks at her again, seeing that she is the same person he was so afraid of, but the warmth she gives off doesn't lie, and he presses his body against hers once more, mesmerized by the constant beating of her heart. And without warning, a world of possibilities opens up before him, and he begins to remember everything that, without knowing, she represents to him, since all he ever wanted was this very moment in her arms, feeling for the first time what it means to have a mother. And a little while later, Miria opens her eyes, realizing that she had fallen asleep and panicking upon seeing Morris sleeping peacefully on her lap. Of course, she wonders how he got there, and instinctively thinks that the best thing would be to call Ryder or her to take care of him, but just then, he snuggles in tighter, clinging to her, so, swallowing her fear of messing it up, she lets herself do what she really wants, to hug him and show him all the affection she has for him. And the next morning Ryder wakes up. Yaya congratulates him for working so hard last night, but also insists that he can take it easier from now on, and little by little he runs into more members of the staff and is surprised to find that everyone is being excessively kind, which makes him feel a bit strange. And just then the mail arrives, and since everyone is busy, he offers to get it, finding that it is a poster. A wanted poster full of criminals' faces, including his own, of course. Ryder panics, and the worst part is that Miria appears right behind him. So he destroys the poster and plays a long while. He realizes he had completely forgotten that he has a price on his head. The worst part is that in the middle of his crisis, he doesn't hear what Miria was telling him, so she asks him to get ready to go out, because she had asked him, and he had agreed to go with her downtown to buy some things for Morris. In short, he's screwed. And so he arrives at a sparkling store that Miria usually visits when she needs her clothes to be tailored, as they have a special system capable of bringing to life any design they can imagine. The only condition is that customers must come in person. And since getting clothes suitable for humans is usually very difficult these days, Miria decided this is the best alternative to get new things for Morris. Just then, the employees of the place approached the little one, insisting that they have heard a lot about him, and that Miss Miria even gave them some tips on how to make him feel at home, so they prepared cookies for him, crayons and everything he likes, and curiously it works, because the poor thing approaches them like a moth to a flame, to which Ryder says that it's not very safe that anyone can control him with a couple of trinkets. Miria agrees with him, running towards the protagonist while he thinks that he was lucky he could get here through a direct portal, sparing himself the trouble of anyone recognizing him on the street. Even so, he knows he's not 100% safe, so he asks her to search this place for cameras. However, the barrier is so powerful that she can't give him an exact answer, except for the presence of some security guards several meters outside the main door. In short, it seems he's safe for now, so he can't help but think about what he should do, assuming the best thing to do is to play it cool as much as he can. And once they return to the mansion, flee without giving them time to ask questions. However, any negative thought completely leaves his body the instant he sees Morris in the first outfit, a bear costume, so adorable that he can't help but scream like crazy. And Miria handles the situation just as badly, crying her eyes out because of how beautiful he is. And she gets creative with increasingly adorable outfits, like one that resembles the clothes she wears, and, upon seeing it, Ryder acknowledges that it's cute, but he thinks of something even better, dressing him in his own style, and she even does her thing by selecting an outfit a rather strange one that she deems perfect. After that, the employees from the store take over, providing slightly more aesthetic outfits that wonderfully match each of their styles, and things proceed normally. Until Ryder realizes something very important, since the price on his head isn't even technically his fault since he only shot illegally to protect Morris, so if he talks to Miria about it honestly, she will surely understand. That's why he decides right then and there to approach her to ask about it, and he was about to do so when he remembered the terrible words that the kidnapper told him at that moment. How could someone as dangerous as you create a human being? And although Ryder, he acted as if it didn't affect him because that simple thought causes him to freeze completely, hesitating, cold at the idea that Miria could take him away from Morris at any moment when she realizes what kind of person he really is. That's why he decides to play it off a bit, asking her what she meant by that cute circle on the letters she sent to the protagonist, to which she simply shows him a photo of the hill where he used to spend his afternoons alone, where you can see in the distance the small silhouette of Morris. Of course, the little one is barely recognizable, but that was the first thing she saw in him, and she was just organizing her paperwork one day when she realized that Slam had sent her a letter, which at first glance seemed ordinary. So she planned to read it later, until she opened it and found herself transported directly to that peaceful hill.
It turned out to be a video message,
which she found strange, but everything took a back seat when she saw a tiny speck in the distance. Of course, it immediately caught her attention, but everything changed when she saw it move and discovered it was a human child so beautiful and adorable that she froze on the spot. And just like that, it was as if time had stopped. He was so round and she had never seen anything like him, so the first thing that crossed her mind was that he was a cute circle. Clearly, that's where the nickname comes from. And Miria tells him that Mori is afraid of recording devices. So that's why they recorded him from so far away, but the important thing is that by the time she realized it, she was already completing the paperwork to be his sponsor and had started sending him gifts. Moving Ryder, who recognized that her story with Morris started out so beautifully, unlike his own, but the problem begins when, out of nowhere, the power in the store goes out, and they're left completely in the dark, so one of the workers turns on a flashlight and points it directly at Morris, whose expression changes from calm to absolute terror. At that moment, Morris, without a second's hesitation, bolts out of the store at full speed, as if his life depended on it, and everything happens so fast that he doesn't have the chance to stop him in time. The worst part is that the little one ends up crashing into an absolutely giant guy who overwhelms him with his mere presence, and even though that could mean he'd be identified as a criminal, Ryder doesn't hesitate to run out towards him to protect him. In fact, he runs right past the security guard, causing the camera lens to turn slowly in his direction, so he was about to be identified. If it weren't for Miria, who was coming up behind him and ended up getting between him and the camera at the perfect moment. But not only that, the woman activates her powers, enveloping the three of them in a sort of black hole and creating a slide of flowers to calm Morris and bring him to them. And despite the initial distress, the moment is very beautiful, because Ryder and she, and even AIA herself, run towards the little one, very worried, asking him if he's okay and if he has any injuries. And everything is so overwhelming that Morris starts to cry inconsolably, but they wrap him in their arms as a confirmation that everything is okay. And later that night, the little one sleeps, clinging tightly to Miria's cards, who undoubtedly represents his safe place, and she points out that she doesn't think it was just the light that triggered Morris's reaction, to which Ryder agrees, since he never had problems with the light from alarms or fire, and the woman clarifies that she decided to light the house with candlelight because she heard that Morris and his friend liked it better that way. And little by little she starts connecting the dots, discovering that what seems to bother him are circular, direct, and sudden light sources in his face. And with that in mind, the three of them begin to think of a way to help him, and they spend a few days discussing what to do. Until one night, everyone gathers in the main room to watch a play. Of course, Morris doesn't understand anything, but everything starts to make sense when they begin to narrate the story of the three little pigs, which are represented by shadow figures. Something the little one had never seen before, and, out of shock, he even tries to approach, but the workers ask him to remain calm. And as the story progresses, we see that it was all Miria's idea, who came up with the idea of using shadows to expose Morris to lights that would initially have shapes mostly square, but that will gradually take on circular shapes. The goal is for him to stop associating those specific lights with something bad, but with something positive, creating a magical night in every sense. The best part is that the strategy works, as Morris is completely enchanted by the story, until he notices that the final pages of his scripts are covered with drawings, so he has to improvise a bit with the rest, and Ryder and Miria have no choice but to follow his lead, going with the flow as best they can, and in the end the story reaches such absurd levels that they complain and feel they can't go on, but then Morris starts laughing out loud. A reaction that's enough for them to decide to continue all night. But at the same time this is happening, we see a mysterious man advancing confidently along a wide bridge and through two giant statues, where he states, "Summon Miria," and after that, Morris wakes up, dazed and drooling after a long night's sleep, and although the sunlight is too bright, just like at the beginning of the story, the difference is that he is no longer alone. Instead, she greets him cheerfully, stroking his head, and congratulating him for waking up earlier than usual, so the little one spends a while stretching like crazy in bed until he notices a lump giant next to him, and, with great curiosity, Morris starts sniffing it, until he pulls back the sheet and realizes it's Ryder, whom he hugs. Joyfully and half asleep, Ryder asks for 10 more minutes. After that, Morris is ready to start his day, so he leaves the room, full of energy, and starts to wander the hallways, being greeted by all the staff members, until he reaches Miria, who is already waiting for him with open arms. And that day officially marks 1 month since his arrival at the mansion. And he spends the rest of the morning getting into all sorts of mischief, like playing with flour and bothering the workers. Even so, all it takes is for his stomach to rumble a little, and he notices he's hungry, causing 3 of them to rush into the room desperately, imagining him all sad and malnourished, so they don't waste a single second and start cooking a wide variety of food and feed him until he's as round as a little ball. And later, Jair notices he's a bit dirty, getting to work on bathing him, except the poor guy has the gentleness of a bounty hunter and scrubs his face as if it were a dirty rag, and once he's clean and dry, Morris himself takes the initiative to go find Miria, his mother, whom he looks at with adorable eyes, and they spend the rest of the afternoon together, until Ryder comes in and asks them what they're doing. Miria tells him they're working on Morris's handwriting, but she clarifies that he hasn't written even one single letter correctly. And with loving eyes, poor Miria tries to explain that he's been quite close, and just then, Morris gets bored. So he looks for a book for them to read, and Jair gets right to it, discovering it's about the phenomenon of separation, something Jair had never read about. So Miria tries to explain it to them with pearls and apples, but it's so complex that when she turns to look at Morris to see if he understood, the little one had already fled, and after that, one of the workers finds him making scribbles on the walls, and although the little guy is too adorable for his own good, she decides to teach him some manners and make him clean up his own mess. And in the end, the wall ends up spotless, but Morris is on the verge of tears, and both Miria and Ryder take the opportunity to teach him that what he did was wrong, and that if he misbehaves, the boogeyman, meaning Jair, will come to scold him. However, they are interrupted by the arrival of the mail, and Ryder runs out like a madman to get it, making sure there's no evidence of his wanted poster, but Miria isn't stupid and notices his strange behavior, so she asks to have a private conversation with him. Clearly, Ryder panics, and although he doesn't hesitate to follow her to her office, he starts sweating like crazy, thinking he's already been caught, that his minutes are numbered, and that the best thing to do is be honest and tell her the truth directly. The problem is, just as he's about to do it, Miria beats him to it, showing him some strange black rocks with carved writings on them, being precisely the gems that allow her to open portals to the Arbiter's chamber. At that, Ryder admits he doesn't understand anything, but she clarifies that she contacted him, which causes an endless number of possibilities to flood his mind, including the fact that she knows he's a danger, reported him, and is about to lock him up in prison. In Ryder's mind, his life is over, but then Miria says something that changes everything, asking him what he thought about joining the clan. The reaction on Ryder's face makes it clear the level of fatalistic scenarios he had imagined, and Miria notices, so she tells him she understands, as it's a very sudden request. But she explains that she contacted the Arbiter to express her wish for Morris to join the clan, and since there's no precedent for humans in it, they were summoned to a special meeting to clarify the situation. And although she hasn't been able to contact Salam yet, she's sure he will take the news well, and once Morris is registered in the clan, the attempted kidnappings in the village will be seen as a direct attack on the Fae, so it would be good for him to join as well to deal with the issue of the price on his head. That last part surprises Ryder, who asks her since when. She has known he's a wanted criminal, and she insists it's been since the beginning. But she didn't think it was important because she saw how close he is with Morris. And she didn't want to be seen as a tyrant. Besides, she clarifies that the truth would eventually come to light, so although it definitely won't be as exciting as his old life as a traveler, she would really like him to join them.
And with that said,
She gives him some time to think and Ryder agrees, taking his leave. However, the first thing he sees is little Morris sleeping sweetly on the hallway floor. So he takes him in his arms and carries him away with an expression on his face that she isn't able to decipher. Curious, her assistant asks him what's wrong, since he looks like he received good news. But Ryder plays hard to get, and we cut directly to the next day of the meeting with the Arbiter, where they dress Morris in his finest clothes, and everyone prepares quite nervously. In fact, Morris himself seems a bit worried, which Ryder notices, and to calm him down, he takes the precious stone that the lizard gave him and divides it in two, clarifying that he won't be able to go to the meeting. But as long as you have that stone with you, they will always be connected, and Ryder puts it on his neck as a necklace, and Miria clarifies that they can always postpone the meeting if he doesn't feel ready, to which Morris insists on continuing, and sure that he will be fine, they activate the portal, clarifying that she will first show her respects and that he must wait a few seconds, just as they practiced. That way, Miria goes ahead and, holding on to Ryder's necklace, Morris crosses the gate after a while, finding himself on the imposing bridge that we saw before, and meanwhile, Ryder and the rest watch the situation from a small screen, and Miria reaches the end of the bridge, standing on an engraving that, upon sensing her presence, activates, spreading a strong energy throughout the entire place until the Arbiter appears as a creature whose appearance surpasses human imagination, and it greets her, and Ryder is paralyzed, even seeing it from the screen, at which Miria bows before it and gives the signal to Jair, who tells Morris that he just has to walk straight towards them, and the little one agrees. And as he takes another step onto the platform, a circle lights up around him, but he doesn't let that intimidate him, and, gathering all his courage, he begins to advance decisively, so the others are happy to see that the Shadow Theater worked, and step by step, Morris keeps moving forward, keeping his gaze fixed on Miria, but then he feels something watching him and can't help but turn to the side, coming face to face with a giant silhouette whose face is nothing more than an illuminated circle, like the one from his nightmares, which stares at him intently, and at that moment, Morris can't help but trip. And so he falls to the ground, causing both Ryder and Miria to worry, and for Jair to almost run to him to help. The problem is that it's already too late to avoid disaster, because the guy with the circle on his face, the little one, approaches and grabs him directly by the arm, asking him if he's okay, a genuinely concerned gesture, but one that Morris sees as a threat, and the little one quickly turns to look at Miria, thinking he should go to her, but his mind drifts to the guy with the circle on his face, who slowly begins to trigger the horrible memories he had with the soldiers. Miria notices the distressed expression on his face and, knowing what's coming, asks the guy with the circle not to grab him, but it doesn't work as Morris goes into survival mode. And the first thing he thinks of is to bite his arm. Of course, the man doesn't understand anything and asks him to please stop. However, this causes other guys like him to start approaching to see what's happening, and for Morris to bite down harder. Desperate, Miria tries to intervene using one of those black holes, but nothing works. And one of the giant statues, which are actually other beings in their own right, clarifies that she can't use her powers there. In the end, she has no choice but to run towards the little one to calm him down, but the Arbiter gets ahead of her, turning into an energy form that enters Morris's body, making him lose consciousness while lifting him up to where he is and, firmly, tells Miria that he expects her to have a very good explanation for what just happened. And then, we move forward several hours later, where Ryder insists that it's absurd that they're accusing the little one of assault, to which she clarifies that they see Morris as a being that is too unstable, so they have decided that it's best to keep him within the Arbiter's jurisdiction. Of course, Ryder can't accept that, so he asks her to calm down, but Miria can't help but wonder what Salam's search unit was doing there, as it turns out the protagonist didn't exaggerate when he connected them to the soldiers from his memories, since those are precisely the soldiers who captured him, and remembering what happened after the Arbiter caught him. We see that Miria was interrogated by these three beings, who insisted that it makes no sense that a child under Salam's jurisdiction could have escaped and gotten so far. Ryder doesn't understand anything they explained, that the three legs of the referee, who insisted that Miria was surely so desperate to take control over the human that she sent people to kidnap him. Of course, she tried to explain that she took him from Salam's territory of his own free will, and that if he wasn't detected, perhaps it was because of the cloak she made for him from Loudray fabric. However, that wasn't part of any master plan, but rather she used that specific material because she read that human children are extremely weak and wanted to protect him. She also insisted that she didn't know Salam's security system had those kinds of flaws, but that the only reason Morris was able to reach the city safe and sound was because he received external help. The problem here is that when they asked her who the person that helped him was, Miria knew she couldn't tell them it was Ryder, since the situation had become too tense and, rather than helping them, it could put his life at risk. Because of that, she said that whoever helped him took their reward and left as soon as they brought him back safe and sound.
But they
interpreted this as her not having any kind of proof, and, to make matters worse, they pointed out that they did have a record of Morris in the city from the moment he was almost crushed by a civilian while running out of the store, a situation in which both could have been seriously injured. In the end, Miria had no choice but to apologize for her failings, but they concluded that the city is no place for a human, so the two beings, giants, who are actually the arms, insisted on sending him to a restricted facility. Clearly, Miria insisted that would be a shock too great emotionally for Morris to bear. So, even though he is unable to communicate like the others, they have to at least allow her to speak with him about it, since they have to give him the chance to prove he can live with her, and in the end the arms stated they would take it into consideration. So, Miria left, but just as she was about to leave, she was interrupted by the arbiter who showed her Morris, and she innocently hugged him. The problem is that it was nothing more than an illusion, which slowly aged until it died. While the arbiter explains to her that time passes differently for humans, asking her if she is sure she can endure such an ending. And in the present we see that several days have passed, and everyone is very worried about the situation, as Miria hasn't had the strength to eat a proper meal all week, and Ryder wonders if he could speak on her behalf at the next meeting with the arbiter, but Jair insists that would only make things worse, since his reputation isn't the best, and if they had trouble believing Miria, nothing he says could make a difference. In short, they have to think everything through very carefully, what they are going to do from now on, because her existence is also illegal, and with one wrong move they could take her away. Of course, Ryder doesn't take that warning well at all, insisting that he created her and she belongs to him, but it is she herself who calms him down, pointing out that it's a possibility they can't rule out. The tension in the room is so thick that Ryder goes out for a walk, thinking about his last moments with Morris before everything went to hell. And just then the mail arrives and he goes to get it, getting excited when he sees that they have finally accepted Miria's request to visit Morris at the restricted facility. Of course, this causes her mood to change, and she leaves behind the paperwork she had been reading. And when the day of the visit arrives, all the staff members give her different baskets with snacks, toys, and the favorite possessions of the little one. And after thanking them, she and Ryder exchange determined glances and set off until they arrive at the facility where she is received by two guards who guide her through the place, and on the way, Miria can't help but look worriedly at one of the last drawings Morris had made, where he innocently drew right on top of that photo, himself on the hill, Ryder, her, and her protecting him. Of course, when he discovered what he had done, Ryder didn't hesitate to scold him, but the photo itself reminds her that she must stay strong for all of them. The trouble begins when she enters the room where Morris is locked up, discovering that the little one is asleep on the floor, with a bunch of tubes connected to his body. The sight is heartbreaking, and one of the workers explains that they had no choice but to feed him externally since he had refused to eat since the first day he arrived at the facility. Not only that, but they even confiscated his cape before he could even enter, because it didn't pass the authorization protocols, and the man doesn't hesitate to point out that he's a violent little thing, so they had decided to keep him sedated and prohibit all physical contact for the safety of the staff. And then, he points out that once Morris wakes up, they can have a conversation for a while. But the situation is too much for Miria, who is left speechless seeing the hell her little one had been living in all these days. As best she can, she tries to explain that she brought his favorite meals and toys to be given to him. However, as time passes, she begins to remember the illusion that was shown to her by the Arbiter, that horrible image of Morris, aging and dying in her arms. In the end, the situation is too much for her, who just asks him to apologize and leaves. However, the worst part is that right at that moment, Morris begins to wake up and, sensing her scent, turns around asking for her. Unfortunately, by that point, she is no longer there. But that doesn't stop Morris from starting to crawl towards the glass that separated them, calling her name over and over again. Morris even starts to hit the glass, as if making an effort to reach her, which is impossible for him. So he begins to cry inconsolably, and just then, his stress levels skyrocket. And the staff don't hesitate to calm him down, administering a powerful sedative that gradually dims his gaze until there is no light left in his eyes and the little one collapses. And as night fell, at the mansion, everyone was very worried about Miria's condition, who had been locked in her office since visiting Morris, and whom the workers had never seen in such a state, and they were desperate. They murmured that one false move could end in disaster, but Ryder was tired of being positive and, against everyone else's warnings, decides to enter the office, stating that they need to talk. To his surprise, Miria doesn't even turn to look at him and insists that she would like to be left alone, but then he notices a letter on the desk. And upon reading it, he goes cold, seeing that it's an abandonment document. And slowly, everything starts to make sense, and asks if they're for Morris, pointing out that it must be some kind of sick joke, since he had just gone to see him. But Miria doesn't say anything, and he presses her further, asking if the little one was just a toy for her to play with for a while. Of course, this ends up being too much, and Miria activates her powers, shattering the space all around her, while looking at him with dozens of cold eyes and warning him not to provoke her any further. And despite her actions, she insists that she is only trying to decide what's best for Morris, but Ryder musters his courage and asks if she really thinks giving up is the best option, at which point she finally breaks down and tells him what she saw during her visit, how she found Morris lying on the floor, having cried himself to sleep, starving and in tears. She explained how horrible it was to see him in that state, and slowly, her feelings become overwhelming, turning the entire room into an infinite void filled with the little one's favorite things. And Miria explains that all of this happened because of her greed, because even though she knew the life expectancy of humans was short, she couldn't help but want more and more from Morris, and took advantage of Salam's irresponsibility to keep him close, instead of just returning him to the orphanage. She even had the audacity to want to make him part of her family, and, in the end, she couldn't help but be selfish because she loves him so much it hurts, and she was sure she could make Morris happy, but instead she ended up causing all this suffering, and there is nothing else in life that wants to be by his side. However, if this situation keeps dragging on, Morris could get weak, get sick, or even die, all because of her selfishness. And Miria tells herself that letting him go is the best option until Ryder shakes her hard, telling her to stop this madness, because nothing she is saying makes sense. At that, she looks up in surprise, but he insists that Morris is, and always has been, too small and delicate for his own good, to the point that when he came back from the desert for the first time, he just wondered how the hell he could have made it there alive. That might sound like he is supporting Miria's logic, but Ryder clarifies that it is the exact opposite. Since even as small and weak as Morris is, he decided to start this adventure and risk his life in the process, all because he wanted to be with her. Besides, no matter how hard things were, the determination and hope in his eyes, every time he read her letters, made it clear that he never once regretted that decision. That is why if she gives up, she would be ignoring all the effort he put in to get there. And in the middle of the silence, Miria confesses that she received a letter this morning, offering her the option to find a good human family for Morris, insisting that a human child needs a human mother, at which point Ryder interrupts her, telling her that none of that matters. Because they can do it, they can become his mother. And in that instant, it is as if something clicks in Miria's mind, and, although she is confused, the next thing we see is her and Ryder leading a meeting with the rest of the staff, where they explain that the goal of the plan will be to prove to the Arbiter that they can be better than any mom that they could ever find for Morris. Of course, the question is how or in what they should excel, so Hea explains that humans are divided into sexes, and when they reproduce, they have offspring, so the most common and ideal pattern is for two adults to unite through a contract called marriage and raise the children together. In short, he needs a dual which they will call a couple or parents, so after thinking about it for a few seconds, Ryder turns to Miria seriously and states, "We are a couple now." Curiously, she blushes, pointing out that the word sounds very cute somehow. And although Jair gets jealous, the funny part comes when she asks who will be the dad and who will be the mom, to which both of them reply that they want to be the mothers, and although they don't have much data on that, she states there shouldn't be a problem with it. On the other hand, she wonders if they should emphasize that they are strong and wealthy, since that's something humans usually like, but Ryder roasts her, insisting that he doesn't have much money to speak of either. However, one of the workers insists that maybe they should prove that they are the ones who care most about Morris. And although it sounds a bit difficult to prove, they stick to the data, like how one has hugged him more than 600 times and another has let himself be stepped on by the little one on at least 400 occasions. And one of the girls gets sad, since she has only scolded him, and starts to cry, stating that they should have let him draw on the walls all he wanted. And just then, one proudly points out that he cooked delicious things for him, and Morris never left a single bite. But he confesses to Amelia that he hasn't eaten in days. So, he also starts to cry while the others try to gather data about humans, concluding that they don't have enough information to build a credible argument, and in the end, the general mood drops. But Mir insists that they can't give up and that they will meet with Salam, implying that even if he doesn't answer their calls, they will show up uninvited. This alerts Jair, who insists that it's too dangerous, but she points out that Salam is the one with the most knowledge about humans and that Morris was found inside his domain. So, if anyone knows about the little one's past, it must be Salam. The only problem is that he is in his playground, the space he established before the area he created for humans, where he dedicated himself to gathering the things he likes, of course. Ryder imagines his own fantasy with Morris, with Aya and a beach. But Jair clarifies that it's not that simple because if you stay too long, it's a space created by someone else's power, without the owner's permission, and he could go crazy and they don't even know where Salam is, and yet Miria insists they have to go, to which Ryder states that they just have to do it quickly and that he'll accompany her, since after all they are the mothers. Besides, Jair insists on joining, to which Miria proposes sharing part of her power with him to save some time, also trusting in Ryder and herself to lead the way, and so they begin the preparations, and Miria sends for a star fragment that will take them wherever they want to go. So she breaks it in her hands, explaining that since they don't have an invitation, it won't be too precise either. That is, they must stay close, and right at that moment, she activates the portal, which throws them directly onto a beach with cold waters, from which they emerge completely soaked, but ready to begin this new search. And so, step by step, they begin to advance along the shore, crossing a wide meadow and several plains, and even a great cliff from which they can spot a school of manta rays flying through the skies. And the path also includes swamps and forests out of this world, which they travel through in search of clues, sometimes ending up in a place only to realize they had taken the wrong route, and at a certain point Ryder finds himself face to face with a creature that leaves him paralyzed and trembling, to the point that he has to take refuge behind Miria for her to protect him. And so they spend the whole day exploring the area without much success. So by nightfall they meet up with Jair, who had been on his own, and who directly clarifies to them that he didn't find anything either, and, with no other option, they have to resign themselves to lighting a campfire and camping to regain their strength, to which Miria confesses that the last time she moved so much was a century ago, but her gaze makes it clear that she is willing to this and more. That said, at least the landscapes are beautiful, and the three of them are fascinated by the sky, stating that Morris would have loved one of those views. The thought of the dwarf also leads them to think something that only Ella dares to say out loud, since they are sure that the little one would have tried to eat every rock or branch on the path, and they would have spent the whole day stopping him from attempting to end his own life every minute, plus they would have had to carry at least 67% more luggage, which is ironic. Because what sense does it make for such a tiny thing to require so many things? And as the conversation turns towards Morris, Jair confesses that at first he didn't understand him, as he always saw humans as unusual creatures. However, the more time he spent helping him, the more he has come to understand that spark that Morris has through his perspective. And back then when he agreed to help them, he told himself that he didn't need to understand their motives to do his job. But as more time passed with Morris, who could be adorable even after being scolded for eating dirt, not only realizing that human babies are unhealthy, wet, warm, and incapable of communicating like normal people. But he also found himself caressing him affectionately, feeling an intense urge to protect him and to never again see the anguished face he made the first time they met, and after that confession, neither Miriam, nor Ayala, nor Ryder say anything, but their expressions show that they understand him perfectly. And the next day, the adventure continues across a ledge from which Ryder is only able to be saved thanks to Miria, and they arrive at a cave full of skeletons, which are not just lying there, but rather remain bowed, as if they were praying to some kind of savior god. Curiously, that is not their destination, but they press on until they reach a kind of giant temple, where in the middle of the vastness, they begin to hear noises and, behind a pillar, they run into a pair of bear
Cubs.
touched, Ryder asks if that is Salam, and Miria clarifies that it is not, but the moment that this one tries to approach the animal, a strange yellow energy emerges from nowhere, immobilizing his arm in a matter of seconds. However, what catches their attention the most is a presence on the other side of the room, where initially there is nothing, but then appears one of Salam's security guards, with the peculiarity that the circle on his face is an intense blood-red color. Without wasting any time, he lunges at him. However, he is stopped by the same yellowish energy from before that traps his foot just long enough for the guard to dodge him completely, and begins to advance towards Miria in a matter of seconds. The impressive thing is that she doesn't look worried and doesn't even move from her spot, as she automatically summons one of her black holes, trapping the guard inside it and confining him to a small sphere that fits in the palm of her hand. However, such a display of power causes the guard to recognize her from within the sphere. He questions Miria, to which she calls him by his name, Nafel, and seeing that they are not a threat to each other, the guy is released, and they begin to catch up like a pair of old friends, insisting that Salam would have been very happy to see her, with a tone that lets them know that their leader is not present and, as expected, this lowers the spirits of the guys, and Ryder asks directly if Salam is not at the location right now, which confuses Nafel even more, so they bring him up to speed and he apologizes for the whole situation with Morris, pointing out that he had no idea, neither about his life nor about his current custody in the restricted facility. And as for the last incident, he also understands the little one's reaction, because although they had found him and put him in the orphanage as part of a rescue mission, it was logical that he would have traumas and see him as a threat. Now, the interesting part begins when Miria puts the pieces together regarding Salam's absence, asking him directly if he is separated. That would explain why their names were present at the last hearing. But also because Morris managed to escape without being detected, and despite the protection offered, the cloak with loud ray fabric shouldn't be enough to bypass the strong security systems. So the only option he can think of is that Salam is in the process of separation, sheltered within the Arbiter's protection. Impressed by his deduction, Nafa confirms that he is right, and that his closest men went with him to show their respects, while he was left in charge of the playground. Furthermore, he explains that his boss is a bit unstable, so even though he should have seen the separation coming, and despite warning him that it could happen at any moment, Salam paid him no mind, and the whole process took him by surprise. In short, his domain has been in complete chaos for the last 6 months, which in other words, means they can't meet with him right now. Of course, their spirits fall and a silence descends that Nafala breaks by offering them a tour of the place, so at least they don't feel like they made the whole journey in vain. And although Miria tries to refuse, he insists, telling them a bunch of fun facts about the place, and even takes the opportunity to show them the collection of miniatures that Salam created based on his favorite creatures. The interesting part comes when he tells them they have an entire wing full of files on human beings, so Ryder immediately interrupts him, insisting he should have started with that, and that they want to read everything they have. And so, Nafa leads them to the place, insisting that Salam would be very happy to see such enthusiasm, since he loves sharing interesting facts, and usually, none of them are interested in listening, not even the Arbiter. Nafa points out that it's not that he has favorites, but Salam always felt sorry for humans, given that by design they have a rigid and unforgiving destiny of destruction, where every sin committed by the body is bound to the soul, so he has taken it upon himself to watch over human children so they don't follow that same path. It's difficult, but they are determined to maintain that same vision. So when they reach a door and open it, he warns them that what they will see inside will not be easy to digest. Even so, Ryder and Mira look at each other and enter without a second's hesitation, finding themselves in pure darkness with a large circle of pure cosmos in the center. Of course, Ryder doesn't understand what they're supposed to be looking at, to which Mira clarifies that it's all the data. All the information about the things Salam has ever shown interest in. The catch is that since humans are also animals, the information probably starts at the cellular level, and Nafala clarifies that they also haven't organized it in several thousand years, so the goal will be to find only human records. Specifically, everything related to the mothers, and it seems like an impossible task. Until Ala notices an object in the distance. And while the others complain that they won't be able to do it in time for the trial the day after tomorrow, she just looks at Ryder melancholically and begins to form a plan, however. To understand it, we go back to the moment of her creation, when the little Ala opened her eyes for the first time, finding a smiling Ryder who welcomed her and gave her her own name. And in the present, Ala asks how much energy is available in the place, clarifying that she wants to use it as an amplifier. And Nafala gives her authorization, but warns that she doesn't have any device to use it with. And little by little Ryder realizes what she plans to do, and she asks him to let her try to sort the data, to which he instantly refuses, reminding her that she is not in the best condition, and although Ayala herself acknowledges that the odds of withstanding the process for more than 10 minutes in her current state are only 12%, meaning there is an 88% probability of damage, but she wants to do it precisely for that reason. Ryder tells her to listen to herself, insisting that it's madness. But Ayala stops him in his tracks, asking him seriously why he had created her, and although he doesn't understand what she's getting at, she explains that if he had created her out of pure convenience, then no, he wouldn't have given her a name, much less the function to smile or the capacity to feel. With that said, she asks again, "Why did you want to create me?" To which he remains silent, just thinking about those endless lonely afternoons that he had to suffer before having her in his life. And seeing that he's not going to answer, she confesses that she trusts his repair skills. So even though she couldn't classify all the data, she could surely be useful to them. And activating the amplifier, she tells them, "I'll leave the rest to you." Of course, the start of the process sets off countless alarms, basically warning her that she won't be able to handle it, but she confidently pushes forward, asking them to make sure to bring her to Morris, and with that, the extraction begins. And despite all the risk, she remains firm as she begins to read the information. At the same time that Miria does her part to speed up the process. Meanwhile, Ryder watches the situation completely paralyzed, trying to stay calm in the face of the thousands of data points that begin to appear in front of them and at one point in the process. Then, another alarm notification warns them that she won't be able to make it, and Ryder steps forward, yelling at her that it's been enough. But she replies for him not to dare interrupt her, as she can do this. And little by little the system begins to overheat. However, she can only think about all the beautiful moments she lived with the little one, about all those emotions that she's supposedly incapable of experiencing. Being an AI, but that marks something inside her, concentrating on holding on for as long as possible, stating that she's doing it because she is also Morris's mom. But her words are interrupted by a short circuit in the system that paralyzes her, and makes it clear that it's been enough. Of course, Ryder tries to intervene and, even though it's extremely dangerous, he sticks his hand inside the amplifier, trying to control the gigantic amount of energy, and is supported by Miria, who uses her other hand to absorb it through a black hole and prevent it from incinerating them alive. And thanks to that, Ryder manages to free her, but her condition is so serious that she uses her last bit of strength to say a couple of indecipherable words before closing her eyes forever. And in the midst of the commotion, Ryder tries to be strong and doesn't hesitate to act, since once Miria confirms she has all the data, her only words are, "Let's go back." And so, the next thing we see is that they're back at the mansion where Ryder has spent the whole night working on Heia's repairs. He even gets help from the rest of the staff, but the interesting part comes when Heia's data shows him a hologram of the motorcycle, and he gets quite nervous, as if it were a sign of what's to come from now on. In fact, his dedication is so great that he spends the rest of the day working nonstop. And it's not until the next night that he decides to leave his office, running into Miria, who had also spent the entire day reading the countless pieces of data they managed to collect. Upon seeing him, she asks him how everything is going with her, to which he thanks her for the parts she gave him, clarifying that he was able to rebuild her. But what worries him is the state of her memory, as there's a possibility she won't remember anything when they finally manage to turn her on. And then an expression of guilt invades Miria's face, however, when Ryder asks her not to worry, as he trusts Morris. And there we see that the rest of the workers are asleep, all of them exhausted from so much researching. Of course, Ryder takes the opportunity to ask her what they had discovered. And what a mother is, seeing that just as they suspected, it's more than just a person's parenting role, but something like a symbol, to which Miria explains that it's complicated. Because the more she reads about mothers, she feels that they could gather everyone in the mansion and still not be able to fulfill everything that is expected of one. And in the end, people from the past even used to describe mothers as their stars, a role she is increasingly unsure she can fulfill. However, they tried to look for information about the woman who gave birth to Morris, but they found absolutely nothing, and Ryder tells them that maybe she disappeared, or maybe she decided she couldn't be there for him, because if there's one thing that's certain, it's that very few people in that world are ready to fulfill that very important role. And just then they see a picture of a boy and his puppy among the data, and Miria confesses that the stuffed animal is the one she made for Maurice, which was supposed to look like some kind of monster but was actually made with the idea of it being a puppy, and of course, as a puppy, it looks nothing like one. So she explains that since then she read that puppies were the gift that human children wanted most, but since they went extinct along with humans, they had no idea what they looked like and had to improvise. And looking at all that data, Miria laments that she could only give him a fake puppy, just what you would expect from a fake mother. However, Ryder stops her in her tracks, insisting, fake? No, Morris liked it, and unconsciously Miria thinks about how happy the little one looks every time he holds the stuffed animal and decides to be honest, confessing that she used to be envious of him, which surprises Ryder. She explains that he and Morris have experienced a lot of moments together, creating such a close relationship that she could only dream of, and that's why when she met him she wanted to send him as far away as possible, and that's precisely why she didn't hesitate to give him a hefty reward, and deep down she knew Morris wouldn't like that, so she decided to let him be the one to decide to leave voluntarily. But that's when he himself insisted on staying, showing a commitment that was unmatched. And with that said, Miria asks him if she isn't pathetic, to which Ryder can only think about that time when she told him how she met Morris, that magical beginning they had together, unlike his own, laughing out loud, before confessing that at the end of the day they are more alike than it seems, and Ryder tells her that he used to be envious of her too, telling her the truth about the way he met Morris, and that's how things unfold. A couple more hours of talking until Miria returns to work, and Estella watches with a mix of determination and sadness, and then she remembers her last moments with her, when she told him that even with all the information they gathered, their chances of winning the trial were still only 36%, as she asked if he knew how to get the bike out without her help, implying that he would need her in order to guarantee victory. And with that in mind, Ryder gets moving. And we cut directly to the restricted facility where Morris's few belongings are being disinfected by a special chamber, while the little one sadly huddles in a corner. The interesting part comes when we see that the necklace Ryder gave him starts to move, as we remember that the gem has the ability to reassemble itself naturally. So it is slowly drawn towards one of the windows. And clearly that catches Morris's attention, who begins to follow it, coming face to face with Ryder, whose mere presence is enough to make the little one's eyes shine with joy. He sheds a small tear and then throws his arms out to touch him, and Morris hugs him with so much joy that we can practically hear his heart breaking into 1,000 pieces, but he makes sure to keep his composure and, seeing the tears fall from the little one's face, asks him not to cry because he has come to save him. And the most beautiful part is that Ryder assures him that he will not only be his mother, but also his father, grandfather, grandmother, sister, brother, aunt, or uncle, since for him, he is willing to do whatever he needs. And remembering their days of adventure together, he insists that when he wakes up, they will escape and be able to go on a trip, just the three of them. However, when he thinks about the old days, Ryder can't help but feel that overwhelming loneliness from before he had them, and is paralyzed, realizing that is not the life he wants for Morris. That's why he tells him that they have to do things a little differently. He can't make him live like he does, so he is completely honest, explaining that there are people who want to take him away, and although they are doing everything they can to be allowed to stay together, the situation isn't very promising, and right now the only thing that can change the outlook is if he himself lets them know what he thinks. At least that's what Aya recommended they do. So he needs his strength and asks him if he has any way to convey his feelings. So the Arbiter knows what he wants. Luckily, Morris understands him perfectly, and, looking through his things, he knows what the answer is. So he starts humming like crazy, asking for the only thing he needs to do his part. And just like that, Ryder hands him his notebook and, with crayons in hand, Morris begins to draw and remembers his first days of survival. Surrounded by wild creatures, remembering the dinners and afternoons spent together with his friends. At the orphanage, remembering the kind looks from everyone at Miria's house. Remembering her, who even though she was a child, made him feel understood. Remembering Miria's hugs and, of course, he remembers the mornings. Waking up next to Ryder and, stroke by stroke, crayon by crayon, Morris puts all his effort into telling his story through drawings. And his mind takes him straight back to that day in Miria's office, where she was showing him flashcards that had objects on one side, and the way to write them on the other, and back then he failed at writing. Even the simplest things, but neither Miria nor Aya got frustrated. Instead, they kept motivating him to do his best. The problem is that there's one specific word that he just can't remember, so he tries to recall it by visualizing that flashcard with a bigger person hugging a baby, which said when he turned it over, "Mom." And so, even though it's incredibly difficult, he puts all his effort into conveying his feelings, continuing like this for quite some time, until one of the security cameras catches the rope Ryder is hanging from. And from the security center, one of the workers assumes it's someone cleaning the windows, but his partner tells him they didn't receive any reports about it, and that only a lunatic would clean a security elevator. Of course, they end up discovering Ryder at almost the same time that Morris passes his statement through the bars and activate the anti-intruder security protocol. Meanwhile, in the morning, Mary prepares to attend the trial, and before going through the portal, she asks about Ryder, to which everyone points out they haven't seen him on any other occasion. That would have discouraged her, but remembering the conversation from the previous day, she is sure he will arrive on time, so she goes on ahead, presenting herself before the arbiter, and automatically, he greets her. And, accompanied by his arms and 3 legs, they begin the trial, where the first thing they do is to ask her if she is going to continue with her whim. And she insists that, as long as Morris doesn't express his own will to abandon her, she will not give up, and in response to that, the legs point out that the boy's intelligence is so low that he hasn't even been able to properly learn the language of his species, but Miri insists that she contacted the orphanage, where Morris was, and they had agreed to help her educate him about human society. And instead of impressing them, they remind her that the orphanage is part of Salam's jurisdiction and he is currently unavailable, so he cannot authorize such processes, but Miri affirms that she already knows that, and that his duties have currently been taken over by the arbiter, whom she directly asks for help, insisting that if he allows it, she can teach him everything about human society from her own home in a family environment. In response, the legs remind her that she was careless with Morris in the past, but to strengthen her point, Miri shows them the orphanage administrators, who strive every day to take care of the children, and yet they still make mistakes because taking care of living beings is not as easy as it seems. Of course, she takes the opportunity to remind them that they themselves also made mistakes that the arbiter himself regrets to this day. And thanks to that, they begin to understand her point, so they ask her how she is going to prove she can take on her duties as a protector, something Miri was already prepared for. Well, she presents a data folder with statements given by each member of her team, all of which are quite varied, but among the reasons why they are most suitable to care for Morris are: I will love him more than anyone, I will never let him go hungry, I am strong and can hug him all day, and Miria acknowledges that she is drawn to caring for a small and very important creature. But she also understands that she is not alone in this, and that in her case, she can share the burden with everyone who supports her. Unfortunately, the arms interpret this as them planning to use Morris as a toy, and that it would become an unequal and hierarchical relationship if so many people get involved, which is why they remind her that there is nothing more dangerous than the thirst for power, as they know well from the experience they had with humans. In response, Miria explains that the power granted to her by the arbiter has always protected him, but if they consider that it might be dangerous for Morris, she is willing to renounce it. Of course, the legs see this as an offense, but the arms ask her directly if she believes she can be the perfect mother, to which she honestly replies, I don't know. Despite all her research, the truth is that in the end she hasn't been able to find a correct answer as to what it means to be a mother. And it's possible she may never know, not even on the day that Morris passes away and leaves her side. But what she does know for sure is that although everyone may define it differently, what a mother is, the reality is that only Morris can decide who his mother is, and she would like them to give her a chance to be the ones to accompany him on that journey. With that said, and with tears in her eyes, Miria pleads with them to give her a chance to try, to which the legs insist that the Arbiter has still not been able to prove the information that Morris came to her voluntarily. The thing is, the entire argument is interrupted when they begin to hear screams coming from outside, and a voice that Miria recognizes, and in that moment she remembers that before all this, she gave Ryder a gem to open a portal to reach the location in case it was necessary. And that's exactly what happens as Ryder, bursts in on his motorcycle at full speed, even dragging the security guards, ready to expose the truth. Unfortunately, Ryder doesn't even manage to reach the platform because at that very moment he is captured by the Arbiter, who transports him to that gloomy expanse where there is nothing but darkness in sight. However, the peace is short-lived since in a matter of seconds, the Arbiter attacks him, causing him to start spitting blood from his mouth and fall completely at his mercy, and then his arms and legs identify him as Fugitive 250-106, pointing out that he must be a madman to try to enter the Arbiter's room in such a way, to which Ryder just scoffs and tells him that to begin with, you can't raise a child with a 100% sane mind. And as expected, such a statement catches the Arbiter's attention. But Ryder continues, asking if he really wants to know what Morris thinks about all of this because he has it right there. A letter written directly by that little human. And slowly, the Supreme Being begins to receive the drawings. While Ryder admits that he knows he is a bad person, a horrible being. However, Morris loves him, so for his sake, he is capable of doing anything. And despite being a criminal, the Arbiter listens to him carefully, and moments later, he unleashes his power on everyone present, stating that the time has come to pass a sentence. Meanwhile, Morris keeps hitting the glass hard, hoping for a chance to escape. And although his efforts seem useless, his determined face pushes him to try one more time until suddenly, surrounded by the Arbiter's aura, he begins to fall into that vast void. And out of nowhere, he ends up in the hands of that impressive being who stripped him of the feeding tubes and puts his favorite clothes on him, while stating, "Young star, until your end comes, you may live the life you want." Of course, Morris understands the meaning of those words and hugs him tenderly, causing him to admit that Miria was right. It's a lovely circle, very charming, and regardless of what it means to be a mother, there is no love more complete than the one between them, so she gives him her permission to go home. With that said, Mori is transported to the wide hill from the beginning. That hill that used to be a tangible representation of his loneliness, but where now, as he looks to his sides, he notices that he is no longer alone, but that he has a whole family waiting for him, and, with a smile, Mori runs towards them. And we get a glimpse of his cards, which are nothing more than a summary of everything he had to go through to get there. Raised among animals, captured by soldiers, making his first friend at the orphanage, receiving the gifts, starting his journey, meeting Ryder, all the way to Miria's house. That's why when the arms ask how they should record that evidence, they only think about it for a few seconds before saying, "The path to see my mother," and the drawings go by and tell the very proof that Mori had been loved from the very first moment they saw him. In fact, this story doesn't just end with a hug, but with the first words of the little one, which is none other than Mom, and which he utters with the certainty of someone who knows he will never be alone again. The best part is that inside the house, with the exhausted and worried staff, she finally wakes up, with her memory intact and a clear affirmation, and they lived happily ever after. Season finale, Chapter 31.